What's up everybody, welcome back to another video, and in today's video we're going into part 2 of the in-depth breakdown series of my piece Internal Resolve. So if you haven't watched part 1 yet, please check the link in the description box below. It'll take you there and you can kind of go over the theory of the piece itself and kind of learn about the structure, not only in terms of the parts that I constructed the piece in, but also the musical structure, like the harmony and the way I like to use the chords to move from section to section. So I think that's going to be super helpful if you're into music theory. But in any case, this video, we're going to be going into the orchestration and the arrangement behind the piece. And speaking of orchestration, if you haven't yet, feel free to download my 10 steps to a clear orchestral sound PDF in the description box below. It's totally free, but basically it's my top 10 tips that I turn to when I'm working on an orchestral piece and I'm looking for a really clear, polished, and rich orchestral sound in my mockups. So if you're doing orchestral mockups and you're trying to arrange everything together and maybe it's sounding a little muddy, or if things are not really sitting the way you want to, this PDF will definitely help you and give you some tips to get you up on your way. So it's absolutely free. Just check the link in the description box below and download it, and you can follow along for your next piece. But without any further ado, let's get into part 2. So in this piece, I wanted to primarily use the Chinese instruments because this was Chinese inspired, and sorry about that. It was inspired by the Ip Man series, and at the same time, this Stretsov Sampling, the company Stretsov Sampling, released their Jade Ethnic Orchestra. So if you haven't watched my review yet of that library, please do. It's a really, really cool library, and it comes chock full of these Chinese and Mongolian and even a couple other ones like Japanese and Vietnamese instruments as well. But in general, I wanted to give a primary focus to the Chinese instruments. So the way I kind of set this up is I put the bowed strings on the top. I'm actually going to extend this a little bit, but here you can see I have these color coordinated. So let's kind of open this up just a little bit. So the top part, I have all the bowed strings. And then the next I have plucked strings. You can see I didn't use that many of them. I have some woodwinds, really beautiful, and finally some percussion. And so those are the amount of tracks I used. So actually, just by looking at this, you can see the distribution of each of the orchestral sections that I used here. So I used lots of bowed strings. And this includes the Western strings as well, by the way. So like violins, violas, cello, basses. Plucked strings, I used the Chinese plucked strings, right? And then woodwinds, I have 3 Asian woodwinds and then 1 solo horn. I just included that with the woodwind section. I didn't want to create a separate brass section, that's all. And then for percussion, I have a bunch of these. So I mixed in some Chinese percussion with a whole bunch of Western percussion. And then finally, some extras. I have some vocals, so Mongolian women, Western women, Western men, mixed choir for ooze, and then some harp for some tinkling. And then I took all those tracks and I bounced them to audio, with the exception of the first track of each contact instance. And the reason is because when I bounce the first track, it always kind of ends up sounding mono, kind of distorted and not very nice. But the other ones don't do that. So it's just the first track where I bounce that it sounds really bad. So I left the first track in each contact instance as MIDI. Okay, so this is MIDI. The first track of the pluck strings is MIDI. The first track of the winds is MIDI, and the first track of the percussion is also MIDI, and so is the Mongolian woman. But for everything else, I categorize them in colors as well. So all the strings are in yellow. The pluck strings are red. The winds are blue. And the percussion is brown, and the choir is green. So let's get into the actual makeup of the instrumentation here. Originally, I had the zhongwu playing the main melody of the piece. So if I just open this up here, I'll show you the patch lists, the patches I went with for this piece. So here's Jade Ethnic Orchestra. By the way, here's the library right there. And if I just open it up, so I went with both strings ensembles, and I used a mixture of the ensembles and the solo. So it's really cool that they went in depth with both solo and ensembles to give you more flexibility. But anyway, First, I chose to use the zhongwu to play the main melody that you hear in the piece. However, it started to sound kind of scratchy and kind of nasally the more I wrote. And I asked a friend, a good friend of mine, and she let me know that, yeah, it's not as traditional to use the zhongwu as a solo instrument. And she much preferred to hear the siu, which is the flute that you hear. So that's what I ended up going with. So if you hear this main melody here, I'm going to put it on solo. A really beautiful sound. So it's this patch over here, okay? So the siu legato. Now at the same time, the other tracks that are playing, let's find what they are. So we have the drum beat to give kind of a pulse. And then here we also have the bass morin kur. So this is a Mongolian instrument, string instrument. We also have the cello, basses, and violas in cinematic studio strings to give a little bed. But if you listen to the bass morin kur, they almost have a scratchy sound to them, and not that much vibrato either. It's very upfront and in your face, this patch. So I kind of layered them underneath. I kind of tweaked the levels so they weren't overbearing. I just tried to make sure that they were sitting nicely on the bottom. And then as well, we have the solo horn, the French horn, adding some richness to the second half of this theme. So toms, and you can hear the deep boom in there as well. But here's the horn. So this is from Cinnabrass. Cinnabrass's solo horn. And then some men choir. Pan slightly to the left, as you can see there. And that's pretty much it. So the arrangement is relatively bare, right? Some bowed strings, more in kur with the some of the Western strings. No pluck strings here. The siu solo by itself, really taking the lead. And then some percussion there to give it a driving rhythm. The reason for this is because the siu is naturally a very quiet instrument, actually, even though it's very expressive and it can do a lot of emotional stuff. In terms of its dynamic range, it's on the quieter side of the Chinese instruments. So we tend to not layer in too much orchestration in the arrangement. We don't want to overpower the woodwind. We want to give it room to breathe and room to shine in the overall frequency spectrum. So it's definitely an important consideration when you're writing. Figuring out the timbral range, the dynamic range of your instruments, you would just want to make sure you understand how loud they can go, and combined with other instruments, where they sit in the mix, right? So, I mean, you can always take the fader and push it up or down depending on how loud you want an instrument in the mix. But if you're gonna put like a flute line that's supposed to sit on top of 12 trumpets, it's not gonna work, because naturally the trumpet sound is just like a lot louder, and you know, when all those instruments are combined together, they will simply overpower a single flute. So you want to stay realistic at the same time. Anyway, so now we start building. We add more vocals. Okay, I guess not, but we have the men choir there. Okay, I also added the Vivaldi trems. This is basically a patch from Cineorg where you just build the like, it's really good for building. So it's like they're doing a tremolo. It's mainly strings, I think, and they're just basically doing a string tremolo in octaves, which sounds really, really cool. See? So really good to add some excitement to your pieces. Now we're using a whole bunch of the strings. So here we have the zhongwu ensemble and also the solo instrument adding in the melody. So here's what it sounds like. This is just the legato patch. Right, very upfront, very nasally in a way, so it cuts through a mix. And then I layered that in with its ensemble counterpart. Right, and then the erhu ensemble as well. So everything here is part of the erhu family. So it gets this really Chinese sound, which is great. And I also layered in Sessui's expressive erhu too for parts of it. So it's just a really beautiful sound. So this is all going on. And then here, oh, and by the way, I also use the DZ, which is the Chinese flute, an octave above to layer in the melody too. So here it is. Definitely you can hear that above everything else. Have a listen. Right? It's an octave above the main melody. There's a French horn counter melody again. Actually, where is it? Actually, the horn solo's not showing up there. Oh, yeah, I used Tina Guo's cello, and also I used the solo Morin Kur layered in together. Because the Morin Kur kind of acts as that cello function in the Western world, for Mongolian instruments anyway. So I layered those two together. Right, so really nice counter melody there. Bass Morin Kurs. Bass Morin Kur here is also doing staccato patterns, just to keep the energy and the momentum going. Dun 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 dun. Right, so keeps the energy up, keeps the rhythmic drive. And then here, we're gonna get really sparse again and bring in the Siu. Here you go. Here we're using the guzheng to give some rhythmic aspect. So let's just have a listen to the guzheng by itself. Right? So you can imagine them plucking the strings, the musician. So it just adds the harmonic body. At the same time, I bring in the drum beat. And then the zhanggu, the string ensemble start to come back in. Everything comes up, and as well, I add in the Mongolian woman choir. There we go. Now, the main melody is being played by pretty much everybody. With the exception of these lower strings like the Morin Kur solo and the Tina's solo. So those are still playing the counter melody. Everything else is pretty much playing like the whole string section. Let's have a listen. So all these guys are playing the melody. The erhus, the Morin Kur, the zhanggu ensemble, they're layered in octaves pretty much. But for the most part, it's all in this above middle C register. Right? So the zhanggu really cuts through really nicely. So does the erhu solo. You hear the Western strings in the background just keeping everything padded and nice. DZ soprano comes in to add a really nice layer on top. And then nice like splash of sound there. Solo Siu. And that's the guzheng coming back in there, I'm pretty sure. Let me check. Where are you? Oh, the guzheng's down here. There it is. And at the same time, I wanted to use the pipa too. So they're just doing their tremolos. But kept them really quiet because they can get quite loud. And then here's just a Western chord. I didn't really use too many Western instruments for that one. You can see it's mainly just these strings, the Western strings, and then I have, what's the flute on top? It's the DZ right there, right? DZ, and we also have the horn stepping up to the top as well, just to finish everything off. Cool. So yeah, for me, the biggest takeaways are, sorry about that. For me, the biggest takeaways are when I'm orchestrating something and I'm thinking about the energy levels and the dynamics, I'm not only thinking about dynamics, I'm also thinking about what type of instrumentation I can put in to achieve that certain effect, the dynamic level, the timbral color, and everything like that. So in a library like this, when we have all these Chinese instruments available for us, the classic hallmark Chinese bowed instrument is the erhu, right? Unfortunately, because the range ended around, I think it was a D, just above middle C. So D, is it, wait, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. So like D4, or is it D3? D4, the D above middle C. The melody couldn't go as low, or like I needed to have an instrument that could play the lower melody, start a bit lower. So in this case, I had to use the zhongwu, but then once I decided the zhongwu didn't sound good enough or didn't sound right in this context, then I switched back to the siu and then brought that up an octave. And at first I was a little bit hesitant because I wanted that low kind of girthy type of melody to establish more of a serious tone, but the siu just added a really nice lightness to it. So it's kind of like understanding the timbres and the colors of each of these instruments that will kind of help you with your orchestration choices. And at first I was going to do this totally using Jade Ethnic Orchestra, but I felt I needed some help from the Western instruments just to give it that, that Western flair and gel everything together really nicely. So you can see I also have an instance of Cineorg here too, just to give everything a nice polish and a glue. But yeah, as I already mentioned in my review of Jade Ethnic Orchestra, this library is very beautiful. The instruments it comes with are very well recorded, and they have a very wide application. So you can really use them to enhance your Western style productions, and they all sound great. Very organic sound, very natural feel, very playable. Just a wonderful library in general. So hopefully that gave you an insight into my orchestration process. And here you can see the MIDI, where I bring in stuff and where I don't. So here's the bridge, right? It's a lot more sparse. The pluck strings, I kind of use the da-ron chords just to give it some rhythmic, rhythmic shape, rhythmic accents. Guzheng we already talked about. That's a really nice plucked instrument, and the pipa as well. I threw in some tremolos. But I didn't want to go too heavy-handed. I really wanted to feature the bowed strings in this piece. I really love strings, as you can tell. And the percussion just kept a steady beat throughout, but also layered in with Western drums to give it that emphasis and the oomph. And speaking of oomph and sound, we're going to be getting into the mixing video next, which is going to be very exciting. So again, if you haven't yet, download that free guide below, that 10 orchestral steps to a clear sound. I really stand by those, and I personally feel if you master all 10, then you'll be really set to make really nice, clear, rich sounding orchestral mockups. So thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video where we'll talk about the mix and the processing behind internal resolve. I'll see you in that video. Take care. Bye-bye.